Hi all, welcome to this, the first video in our next topic, which is looking at urban geography. Now, to start us off today, I want to do a quick overview of the urban geography topic. So this is vaguely how we're going to be going through things. So we're going to start with urban land use zones, and this is going to be fairly straightforward, look at the different areas of varying land use type that we see in cities and urban areas. What are the common characteristics, what changes do we see as we move through the areas, and so on. Then we're going to move on and we're going to look at two case studies. Now the two case studies we're going to be looking at, firstly we'll look at Glasgow, and when we're looking at Glasgow we're going to be looking at change. We're going to be looking at changes in the CBD, which means the Central Business District. We're going to look at changes in the inner city, and then we're going to look at changes and conflicts in the suburbs. Now don't worry if some of these terms aren't particularly familiar at the moment, we are going to discuss them more in the video today. Once we've done that, we're going to go to Mumbai and we're going to look at various housing issues that Mumbai faces, and particularly we're going to be looking at one of the shanty towns in Mumbai, a place called Dharavi. Now, to get cracking with today's video, before we start thinking about the kind of details of land use zones in an urban area, we need to think about what is the kind of common structure of a city that we see of an urban area. Now, what we've got on screen at the moment is something called the Burgess concentric ring model. Now, you can see that it's called that because, well, it's a series of concentric rings, and the guy who came up with its surname was Burgess. And if we go right into the centre of a city, so right into the city centre, we've got what's known as the Central Business District, or the CBD. Now, this is an area where we've got most of the shopping and money that's spent in a city is found here. If we move outside that, we've got an area of industry. Now, when we're going to be looking at Glasgow, we see that this area of industry has declined in quite a pronounced fashion, but there is still an area there that has some industry, and the remnants of the old industry that used to be there are very, very obvious. Next to that, we've got an area of working class housing. Now, this working class housing used to be there because of its, number one, proximity to the industry, because working class people at the time, and at the time this housing was built, we're talking the 18th, 19th century, these people didn't have access to personal transport, so there were no cars, things like that, or at least people who were working class didn't have access to them, so they had to be near to where they worked. Also, these areas used to be fairly poor choices to live in due to their proximity to the industry and factories, which meant that they could be quite polluted and unpleasant places to live. Next to this, we've got a working class housing area. So again, it's the middle class housing area. It's very slightly further out from the city. This is people, again, that have got a little bit of money for personal transport, things like that, and they've got money so they can actually choose to live in a slightly nicer environment. And once we move beyond that, we're into the commuter zone, and this is where we start to transition from a city, from an urban area, into possibly a rural area, possibly smaller towns and other types of settlement. Now, if we start to think about these zones one at a time, and what do we expect to see in them? So first, the Central Business District, the CBD, the city centre. Now, the basic characteristics of this area: number one, it's going to be the oldest area in the city. This is going to be where the city started, and it's grown out from that point over time. Now, interestingly, because of that, one of the things that we can actually use to identify the CBD is the number of churches that are present there. Now, obviously, if you go back, a couple hundred years into the UK's history, religion was a lot more prominent than it is today. And because of this, we've seen far more churches being built, and particularly churches being built in places of prominence. Now, that's not so much the case today, but it does mean that we can use this to try and identify where the CBD is. It's one of the biggest tricks you'll use if you're trying to identify the CBD on an ordnance survey map, is to look for an area where you've got a lot of churches. Now next, main roads meet here, main rail links meet here. So we are talking about a place where a lot of business is done. So you need to be able to get there. Both staff who work in these businesses and consumers to purchase from them need to have easy access. Now, the next one is high order shops and entertainment. Now that phrase high order is a new one. Now what we mean by that is a high order shop is a shop that you are going to go to specifically to buy normally a fairly expensive or exclusive item. So you're talking, electronic shops or kind of top end clothing shops, furniture, things like that. These are shops that you would make a plan to go to. You wouldn't just pop into them on a whim. We call the ones like that, we call low order shops, and that's things like, a newsagent's, the corner shop, that kind of thing. Now we also have, entertainment, hotel and tourist facilities, we've got offices, and all of these things add together lead to an area with really, really densely packed buildings, and a lot of these buildings tend to be very tall as well, because they're so densely packed. Now, what's been happening to the CBD? What things have we seen that happen in CBDs up and down the UK? Now, first, we see a lot more indoor shopping centres being built. I don't need to tell you guys how unpleasant the Scottish weather can be, and because of this, having an indoor shopping option is something that a lot of city centres are doing to try and bring more consumers into the city centre. We also see that the road networks are evolving, they're changing. Let's say CBD's oldest area in a city. In a lot of cities, the road network predates cars. Particularly if you look at the old town and what have you in Edinburgh, it's clearly not a city centre that was built with the car in mind. So a lot of cities are enhancing and upgrading the road network, putting in things like one-way systems to try and make it more accessible for people who are arriving in cars. And along the same kind of theme, we've got pedestrianised areas. So one of the big things with the CBD is shopping. So we want an area, or we want numerous areas where pedestrians can walk freely, access shops without having to cross main roads consistently. Now, what do we see the land use in terms of how much of a split have we got? Now, as you can see from the list here, we've got 45% plus commercial land use. So that's, up to, nearly a half to well over a half of the land use is shops, it's bars, it's entertainment, it's things like that. The next kind of 40% or so is going to be offices. And then the next 10% is going to be public buildings, like in Glasgow, the city chambers or courthouses, things like that. And then your last 5%, you might have some factories and things like that, which we would class as industrial. Now, things to note here is that there is more or less no residential use. There are more or less no houses in the CBD. And the reason for that is the land is so expensive that you wouldn't be able to afford the rent. It was just so exclusive and expensive an area to live. Any housing in the CBD is prohibitively expensive. And that again leads to why we've got mainly shops and offices. And again, the reason it's so expensive, you've got a lot of people want to have a building in the CBD. A lot of people want to have a shop there because there's so many people, but you don't have the space. So that means you've got a very big demand, a very low supply, so price goes up. Now, if we move on, the inner city. Now, this is a phrase I'm using for the first time now, and this kind of incorporates both the factories area from the concentric ring model and the working class housing. So again, we're talking kind of 18th, 19th century. For a Glasgow context, we'd be talking a lot of heavy industry, things like shipbuilding. And in association with that, we would have straight rows of tenement housing. Very few gardens. The shops and services we have here are going to be low order. So it's things like, corner shops, things like that, to support the people who live in some of the more affordable housing in this area. And again, buildings are still very high density here. Now, over time, we have basically seen the inner city decline rapidly. The factories, the industry in these areas has moved. A lot of the time it's moved abroad. And because of that, the people who lived there, a lot of the time became unemployed, had to reskill, move to other areas for work, and it's seen these areas become abandoned. And sometimes they either go into real decay, or they get bought up by housing developers and the like, who redevelop them into higher class housing. Now again, as you can see from here, land use, you do have a fair chunk of residential land use. And the reason for this is all those tenements that we talked about that were built there to house workers for the factories. And nowadays, you tend to find you might have some more kind of upper class flats that have been built there for younger professionals. We've still got industrial and commercial use in the area. We still have factory-sized buildings. We still have some offices. And one of the new things that creeps in the inner city is the arrival of some open space as well. So the land here is still reasonably expensive, but it is starting to get cheaper. There's less demand on the land, so the supply can meet it. Now the next area, urban fringe, city edge, this is where we're going to start to see a lot more housing appear. So we're talking late 20th century, and one of the big things here is there's been a real defined plan. These areas haven't just been built organically. It's not just like adding block on block on block. Somebody has sat and planned this whole area out. We see shopping centres, we see office areas, we see housing areas. Building density is low. We plan to keep them separate. We put in green space and we keep the buildings small. Now, the big thing here is that it's expanding out into the countryside, but this is something that we tend to legislate against. We tend to make laws to limit it from encroaching too much on the countryside. Now, one of the big things here to note in the land use is open space. Open space has crept up to 20% here. So we are giving people more access to things like gardens, car parks for businesses, actual parks for recreation. The reason we can do that is because, again, there is less and less demand for the land, which means supply is high and prices can be low. And if we move into our last area, the suburbs, so right on the edge of a city, newer build areas, 20th century onwards, we're looking at, semi-detached and detached houses, maybe some flats. Now, I've got a typo on my screen and everything here, so we've got both low and high-rise flats. And again, green space, large gardens, garages, parks, low building density. Now, the suburbs, due to the fact that they're reasonably new, we've not seen a huge amount of change here. Some of the flats have been improved, and we might see some enhancement of some of the traffic systems, particularly if they were built 60s, 70s. We've maybe seen the introduction, more roundabouts, more pedestrianised areas, 20s plenty, things like that. Then again, we look at land use, the big player here, residential. This is an area that is almost entirely focused on families. So we've got a lot of big family houses. Then again, the next one, open spaces, links back in. This is an area for families. The rest, we've got some commercial areas, some small industrial areas. And then the difference with industrial here is we're not talking about big factories. We're talking about, maybe small industrial estates, where you're going to be looking at, very, very small discrete units, maybe actual garages for repairing cars, things like that. And again, why is this the case? This is that we've got so much open space in residential here because the land is cheap. We've got huge amounts of land right on the edge of a city that not many people are fighting for. So, it can be affordable. Now, I'm going to wrap this video up here, guys. It's getting to be one of the longer ones. There's been a lot of information here. All of the tables here are going to be really, really useful for notes. So if you've not done so already, I would encourage you to go back, pause the video at the relevant points, and take copies of these notes, these tables for your own notes. They will be really, really useful. The next video is going to start to look at our first case study in Glasgow, but we're over 14 minutes now, and I think that's time to call it a day. I'll see you guys next time.